important outcomes of these first qualitative analysis that we have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mazzucatelli. It was a really interesting paper. So I just ask to everyone to turn off the microphone if they are not talking. In so doing, we will avoid problem of connection. So let's now introduce our second and third speakers, which will present their paper jointly. So Carlo Corsato and Kate Devine. So Carlo Corsato is a specialist on early modern art and architecture. He currently works at National Gallery of London as a gallery educator, where he develops learning sessions and activities to promote inclusion and access to the wider range of audience. He also works with the Royal Observatory in Greenwich as a learning coordinator. And finally, he is a lecturer at Morley College of London. He also lectured at the universities of St Andrew and Buckingham. Kate Devine, our second speaker, she's a PhD student at Royal Holloway University of London, working on a thesis on crafts in Italian and art design. She works at Royal Academy of Arts as educator and as a workshop leader. At present, she's also a gallery educator at the National Gallery of London. She writes for Tate Gallery as well. And in 2015, she was the curator of the exhibition Private Lives Public Space at the Fiumano Gallery. So I'm glad to thank our speakers for being here, for presenting their paper entitled Digital Divide, Diversity and Access in Museum Education. I leave you the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, first of all. And thank you, Paola, for this introduction. And thank you for having us here, actually. And we are really, really excited and super thankful to the organizers to put in all this together. So let me share the screen. Let's see if I can manage to do it properly. Kate, can you see it?
I can.
Okay, that's good news. Wonderful. Right. So let me move to the presentation, otherwise I have no idea what I'm doing. Here we go. Wonderful. Right. So the title is very ambitious, Digital Divide, Diversity and Access in Museum Education. And, you know, we are very aware we can only scratch the surface of this, a huge topic this morning. It's impossible to cover all the other aspects. Obviously, there is the Q&A at the end if we want to ask more questions about the things we are going to present. But anyway, even if it's a very ambitious topic, let's give it a go and let's clarify what we are cooking for you today. So in the first section will be Kate giving you an overview of how the National Gallery, we have the privilege to work, was able to adapt to the pandemic and move most of its learning activities online. We are very lucky enough to work in a fairly big learning team. And actually, we are even more lucky because we work with a very supporting team. But nonetheless, the learning curve was quite steep for all of us. And Kate will explain some of the challenges that we faced. In the second part, we want to present some very, very specific case studies, two in particular, focusing on parts of the audience which are usually marginalized because A, they don't have a formal training in art history. So they don't really have, you know, the intellectual tools to approach the stuff we do in the gallery. And B, they may need to be engaged in smaller groups. And the second aspect is particularly important because, you know, nowadays, many galleries and museums are more concerned to expand the number of visitors rather to expand the forms of engagement. So we focus on two in particular case studies, one developed with Art History Link Up and focusing on young people. And I will highlight in particular peer learning and online engagement. And the second case study presented by Kate is developed with Portugal Prints a charity that works with people with mental health difficulties. And she will clarify what meant to move from on-site to online delivery. And for both case studies, we'll try to present some of the challenges and how we try to follow up the sessions that we organized. So I think this is enough for the introduction, and hand over to you, Kate.
Thank you very much. Can we move to our next slide? Wonderful. So since March this year, it will not be news to you, but many galleries and museums in the UK and of course beyond have been rapidly finding new ways to engage with their audiences online rather than on site. And the National Gallery in London has been no different. Even before the institution was forced to close, visitor numbers had dropped quite dramatically. And after we were asked to shut our doors completely, the only avenue to engage with our public was a digital one. So it was fascinating to see just how many people turned very quickly to the gallery's existing online offer. Next slide, please, Carlo. Visits to the Google virtual tour of the gallery were up 642% compared with the period before that advice to stay at home, an increase of over 3,000% on the same period the year before. And visits to our own virtual tour pages were up 506% in April this year compared to the period before lockdown, an increase of 2,000% when compared to the same period last year. So quite big rises there. Next slide, please. Since the 16th of March, all the gallery's social media channels have experienced an increase in followers, but particularly our YouTube channel, which is interesting because it has the most in-depth content. From March to October, we produced 32 new films, which have had 2.3 million views altogether. It's about 72,000 views per film, with most people staying from start to finish. And that generated, so from the YouTube site, that generated 170,000 views of our website content, with people staying sort of 5 to 18 minutes. So you can see how that's really increased and that it's affected our own website visits on social media. So unquestionably, the appetite for online content was there, but the question was how best to serve our audiences in terms of learning and outreach programs, which is what Carlo and I are concerned with. Next slide, please. As a learning department, we are lucky enough, as Carlo mentioned, to be a large in-house team comprising not only programmers across schools, young people, families, adults and access, but also 12 educators and 3 learning assistants whose job is solely the preparation and delivery of tours, workshops and lectures. So this enabled us, of course, to respond fairly quickly to changing circumstances, to share materials and ideas, and to collaborate in a way that would just not have been possible if dealing with ad hoc or freelance educators, which the department used to do until fairly recently. It should also be noted that, as Carlo said, we're fortunate enough that we're a big team and we're a big institution. So we can try new things. We can sort of weather a certain amount of risk. We're allowed to sort of have failures. We're allowed to be a little bit more intrepid. However, endeavouring to reach the broad range of extremely varied audiences we usually work with held many challenges. Next slide, please. The extremely variable access to internet, which Carlo will talk a bit about later, and reliable technology was a hurdle across all programmes, and particularly those which aim to open up the museum to people who perhaps already face barriers to entry. Questions of safeguarding had to be reconsidered for working online. So we were talking about it earlier, this Zoom bombing problem, how to ensure digital platforms are indeed safe when working with people that are under 18 and audiences like at-risk adults, and what to do if that ever happens, if that safe space is breached. There was also the question of our own personal levels of competency with new software and online presentation, together with competing for support from the gallery's digital and audiovisual team, who we're very lucky to have a really fantastic team, but as you can imagine, they were incredibly in demand and quite overstretched. In addition to these practical concerns, there are also challenges relating to pedagogy, relating to teaching itself, and also to inclusion and well-being, which are related to those things. Being online had the potential, as Carlo said, to reach vastly increased numbers of people, and certainly some more entertainment and lecture-based programs have benefited from huge increases in audience numbers. But this only really works with a one-size-fits-all event. For groups that need a more individualized and tailored session, smaller groups remain really important, even when working online. And we're fortunate enough that the gallery sees value in that small group teaching, and some institutions really struggle to justify it. Related to this, of course, is the social and community building function of a museum as meeting place, which has been totally upturned by the pandemic. The idea of developing relationships, promoting well-being and togetherness through our programs was now a particular difficulty when having to rely on digital learning platforms where participants are regularly zooming in from their various respective homes. Next slide, please, Carlo. With regards to teaching practice, the move online presented another set of challenges. Our goal as educators is most often to facilitate learning through conversation rather than lecturing. This type of student-led approach encountered a plethora of obstacles in the online setting, where you'll be familiar with all of these. Audio delays, interruptions, switched off cameras, all present considerable barriers to fluid conversation and to creating a supportive space for discussion. The non-verbal cues, which are often so important and obvious when sharing a space physically together, suddenly impossible to pick up on. And the mood and attitude of participants in the room is much harder to gauge when you're not there. All of this to say, we were dealing with a rather large set of challenges, which up until that point we had really no experience of, as the vast majority of our programming had been in person and on site and not online. I'll hand over to Carlo now for the first of our case studies.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful. Right, so I think we can move on immediately to the first case study, and presenting this interesting charity, Artistry Link Up. Is based in UK, obviously. Is a charity with a very interesting ambition that resonates very much with what we do in the Learning Department at the National Gallery, which is make artistry accessible to everyone. And being Italian, having many Italians in the audience, you may think that this is a given, because at school, you know, I study history of art, but it's not the same in UK. As I probably mentioned very briefly in my opening, not many people in UK have a formal training in artistry. Less than 10 state secondary schools out of 3,000 offer A-level history of art. By contrast, over 90 private schools offer the subject. So if you're not familiar with A-levels, they are the subject qualifications that students take to complete secondary school, and they are essential to enroll on university courses. So that means if you don't study history of art in your secondary school, it's very unlikely that you consider that subject for your future career. And on top of that, as many as you can easily imagine, pupils from non-white backgrounds are paying the IDES toll. And Artistry Link Up is an answer to this need. They complement the national curriculum, offering free courses during the term time in collaboration with the National Gallery and the Wallace Collection in London. And since I mentioned, backgrounds, I think it's quite interesting to emphasize that they, in the 2020-2021, they have over 40% of students that are from BME, and also over 60% of students are from what is usually called widened participation backgrounds, which means they may have disabilities or they may come from lower income families. So the keywords of what they do and what we've done in collaboration with them is offering formal education through an immersive learning experience and promoting inclusion, diversity, cooperation. So I think this is the perfect time to talk about digital divide. Obviously, only in general terms, we don't really have the time here to unravel all the complexities. But the crucial element is internet access, which has been sort of the elephant in the room in all the conversation we had this morning. So we can offer the best and most articulated learning experience using any of the available digital technologies, but we cannot succeed if we don't get our audience online. And if we can provide them with a fast connection as well, just consider what we're doing here at the moment, right? Streaming, or if you want to offer video tutorials, we've seen, the previous presentation, an example. So you need loads of data during those, streaming and during those online consumption, if you like. So if we look at the official figures, it looks like we're doing quite well in UK, right? 96% of the households have access to fast broadband. But we need to bear in mind that access doesn't mean necessarily that everyone can afford a contract and pay for broadband providers. That's one element. And we can observe also this 96% from a different perspective. So if we move from urban areas to rural areas, actually the picture is very, very, very different. We just discovered that 77% of the households cannot access the fast broadband. And if we translate this into a number of individuals, that means that over 7.3 million of people are excluded from fast broadband. Right, let's focus now for a moment to children. What happens if you look at the situation there? Right, the situation actually looks pretty dire because 15% of them need access to free meals. I don't have any device at home. That means that during the lockdown, they've been completely, marginalized and excluded. And it was a huge risk for their future, obviously. And also that means that for museums and galleries, we are sort of excluding this very big percent of people from being part of our future audience and to be interested at all in what we do in galleries and museums. So this is quite interesting. And if you feel that this is just a problem is in the future, actually that kind of future is literally around the corner because, this generation is always defined as our future, but actually they're our present. We need to involve them now and we need to start the change now. So let me explain how we try to, encourage this change with artists to link up. So we organize an evening, just a night for these students. We talked about 40 students. They're coming from the backgrounds I already described. And we wanted the speakers to be their peers. So we selected 2 young producers, the developer with them the content. They led the session, not only the delivery, but also the project itself. And I will present you in a moment, Juraya and Olivia, and you'll see how they can be real superstar. And then they've been supported by 3 educators, myself, Kate, and our lovely colleague, Jenny. And we needed 3 managers to, organize the entire project. Margot Potron, she's our adults people programmer, myself, and Rosa Aidin. She's the founder of Artists Will Link Up. So you may think, why such a big team and such a big effort for only 40 people and an hour of enjoyment, an hour of learning, right? I need to explain you what we've done first, and then I can answer this question, and I will be very quick. So we created a menu with 12 paintings divided in 3 different sessions, and we link big questions, big themes to this paintings, and we offer the audience the possibility to choose what they wanted to see, what they wanted to learn. And then during the sessions, we promote an engagement, having 1 leading speaker, you can see Olivia, and the support of an educator, you can see Kate here. And then the educator was sort of modeling the questioning for the audience that could interact to the speakers using live polling and Q&A boxes. First session was Botticelli, as you can see here. And the second session was about Rembrandt. And we also offered, close-ups, visual analysis. We promoted critical thinking, and all the facts were scholarly informed. It was not just a casual talk about paintings. And I want to briefly show you what they did.
I actually love this painting itself. The colors are particularly what attracted me to it. I love the color blue, and I love the types of blues Van Gogh uses in his portraits and paintings. And many people actually view this painting as unsettling because of the way it contrasts with the colors present, the yellow, the blue, the red. However, I love the warmth of the terracotta tiles and juxtaposing the coolness of the blue. What's your opinion, Livy?
Yeah, well, I do sometimes see this painting as quite lonely. I think blue is quite a cold colour, as you said, and that kind of absence of human life, and there's no sitter. Whilst it invites us into the painting, it also reminds us that no one's there. And I think that's particularly kind of poignant when knowing about the argument Van Gogh had with Gauguin, his friend, and this was painted pretty soon after. And Van Gogh, their argument was so bad that Van Gogh actually threatened Gauguin with a razor, and you may know that he then chopped off his ear.
Right.
I actually love this painting.
I didn't want to.
I actually love this painting.
We know she loved the painting, right? So I want to show you the key ingredients, how we build this and making the young people real protagonists. So careful planning, training. We train these girls. I mean, they're natural, obviously, but we rehearse a lot with them, and we created the content with them. And then we asked them that during the delivery to show their passion, to speak the truth, to know what they're doing. So they research the topics, to listen to each other. If you've probably seen how Juraya asked, "Oh, what do you think, Olivia?" And also at the same time, they were mindful that what's going on behind the scenes. They checked the chat box to see what we may suggest during the delivery, and obviously mindful of the time. Speaking of which, I think it's the perfect time to hand over to you, Kate, and you can briefly present the Portugal prints.
Thank you, Carlo. I will try and be quick. In February of this year, our gallery's access programmer, Anna Murray, began working with this charity. Oh, yes, you're running out of time, aren't you? Paola, say something?
Yeah, I would just to remind that you have last 3 minutes.
Okay.
we can do it. Thank you. Thank you.
So we was approached by the charity Portugal Prints, who work with adults with mental health difficulties. Initially, we started working in the gallery, if I can see the next slide, Carlo, looking at a Bomberg exhibition, and afterwards we had a session where we made screen printing prints. If you go on to the next one straight away, you can see exactly what we made. And it was really successful. The group enjoyed it thoroughly. And some of the things that they took away from it really was the physicality of the activity, the opportunity to do something like screen printing, which is quite involved. It's quite messy. You need the space to do it. They hadn't been able to do that at the studio at their own base. There was also an emphasis put on collaboration and on sharing and working together, which came across very strongly in the feedback from that session. However, some people also noted that it had been quite a stressful session in some ways, because sometimes the gallery is very overcrowded. You can see a picture probably next, actually. They found it difficult perhaps to see over the heads of other people. It can be quite a stressful, anxiety-inducing situation when it's a new place that you don't know. And other people that were sort of late to the session perhaps found it difficult to track us down within the galleries. So there were pros and cons to this working on site, this initial session with the Portugal Prints group. In March, of course, suddenly everything was closed. We were no longer able to host any on-site workshops or tours. So a few months went by where we were really just thinking, what on earth are we going to do, collecting our thoughts. And in June, we were able to go back to the charity and say, okay, let's do an online version. Let's carry on working together, but online. If you go to the next slide, please, Carlo. So these are works that we produced in some of our initial online sessions. And by now we've had about six months worth of these monthly online workshops. And our approach has had to be very flexible and adaptable as we navigate these different levels of lockdown. For several months, participants were Zooming in from their respective homes, you can see on the next slide. But measures were eased slightly at one point, and then they were allowed a few people in their studio. So we had some people at home, some people in the Portugal print studio, me in my home. So we had to be quite flexible and adaptable with how we were running these online workshops. Numbers have been quite steady, but we are still falling a few short of the number that came to that initial workshop in the gallery. And one of the reasons for this is not just perhaps access to Zoom and similar platforms or internet, but also for some people a certain distrust of these platforms and even a fearfulness of using them, which may or may not be related to some of the mental health problems that these people are living with. So that's something to bear in mind. We also had to contend, of course, with limited access to materials. At the National Gallery, we have a whole host of materials that we're able to use, meaning that we can be led by the participants. If they don't want to do something that we have planned, we can adapt to them, we can give them something else to do. Of course, this isn't possible when you have to plan something out that everyone's going to do from their individual homes, as we've been doing recently. So the relationship between myself and the group also inevitably changes. As I said, we try and be very student-led or able to adapt to the needs of our participants, which can be very difficult when we're moving to an online platform. It situates me very much as a professional, as the expert, and them as the students, rather than putting us on a level, and means that I end up talking far more than perhaps would be ideal, and certainly far more than I would have done in the gallery or in the workshop setting. So there's a distance between myself and the participants when we go online, which is unfortunate. That power dynamic inevitably changes, which can be a barrier to inclusion for some people. For other people, of course, it was great that they were allowed to do these things at home. As I said, being in the gallery can be a very anxiety-producing experience, especially when it's busy. And some people found it much more relaxing to be at home. If you're feeling unwell, either physically or mentally, it's very easy to take a step back if you're working from your living room. We can see the next slide, please, Carlo. You can see some of our works here. We have had to, of course, reduce the materials that we're working with as well. So we're using some quite simple pared down workshop plans, because we can't have this whole host of materials available to everyone to make sure everyone can participate. And you'll see in my final slide that we have in fact had to be sending out many of these materials to participants in their own home, or to the studio at Portugal Prints, where they could come and collect them. So that's been the added sort of extra for us, having to package up these things. It's just had a small financial sort of impression, but it has really been extra time requirements that have been the major difference, I would say. I hope I fit that in nice and quickly. I will hand back to Carlo for a closing remark.
Actually, I'll just be very short. If you want to get in touch and want to know more about these two programs, you got the details on the screen. And if you want to know more about all the other programs we deliver on a daily basis, you can probably ask us during the Q&A. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really interesting. So it is now time to open our discussion. Actually, we touched on very important points during those two papers, starting from interaction between social life and public arts and public spaces, and learning activities in the passage, let's say, from the online to from the on-site to the online. So I invite those who want to ask the question to ask for the floor. So yeah, we have the first question by Tiziana Mancinelli. So I read it for you. Many thanks for your presentation. I'm very interested in the issue of inclusivity in digital projects, thus improving accessibility. I was wondering if the National Gallery website is following the W3C guidelines to increase reading possibilities, for example, for visually impaired, etc. Given the website contains many images. Okay, this is for Devine.
I don't know if they are specifically following those guidelines. That would be something that I'm sure our Access programmer would know the answer to. I imagine that they are. There's certainly opportunities on the website to enlarge fonts, to enlarge images, and there's a lot of different functions you can do. One thing related to this, which I found particularly interesting from a talk that I was doing, was people that lip read, and how difficult that can be when working on Zoom compared to in real life. And that has been something